The city came out and they're just like, no, bro, you need this whole thing inspected.
A lot of his work was not up to code.
Have you ever had a friend or a neighbor go through a renovation to hear nightmare stories from them in the middle or at the end? I routinely hear that from clients who call us when they're in the middle of a remodel like that and it's just not going well and they don't know what to do. Today, I want to share a story of a client that worked with us to solve that, and then talk a little bit about how you can avoid it.
So March of last year, my wife and I decided that we wanted to finish our unfinished basement. And to set the scene, we have a 1942 home. All we had down there before was just a furnace and a washer and dryer. So I thought, in my mind, let's make it accessible from the house rather than the garage. So that was my first instruction to this contractor. I said, relocate the entrance, punch out that closet, make that descend down to the basement. What I also said, I want this up to code. I want this to be an addition to my home, right? I think it's silly that I even have to tell a contractor that. And so he's like, yeah, no problem, no problem. So I signed a construction agreement with him in April. He began construction a couple weeks later. Little did I know that he just began work without obtaining any permits.
So in the beginning, this client reached out to us and they had been going through a basement remodel for way too long. And that's a common thread with a lot of nightmare construction scenarios. Often, as was the case with this one, contractor can get started pretty soon. But the problem is, once your house gets smashed, it takes forever to put it back together. The reason for delays are various and different, but in this instance, contractor didn't really know and didn't have a good process for how to convert living space and pull permits. He didn't know how to do the initial research. So that is a big part of what stretched this project out so long.
So what happened was he applied for an electrical permit a couple weeks after starting this construction, thinking it would just be easy peasy. And the city came out and they're just like, no, bro, you need this whole thing inspected under a building permit. At that point, I was like, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? So they sent out an inspector and the inspector talked to the contractor and the contractor's like, okay, we're going to stop work. We're going to get the permits. It shouldn't be more than a couple of weeks. He gets the permits in like May. Well, he doesn't get the permit. He applies for the permit in May. And there are like 5 code violations that were identified in him getting the permits. Finally, it got to September or October. And I'm like, okay, where are you at with this process? We can't keep waiting anymore.
So a lot of his work was not up to code as far as insulation goes, framing, kind of all of it. Washington has very strict energy requirements, so all of the exterior walls down here had to be insulated behind the framing. So we had to tear out all of the exterior walls. He had framed in a stairwell that was not correct. Runs were too short, the rise was too tall, and so county would consider it a ladder.
As they went through the process, the contractor pulled some permits, not all the permits. The contractor did work that was not up to code, and eventually the homeowner just had to kind of throw up his hands and say, look, this isn't working out. It's been a year, year and a half, and you haven't solved the problems that we've set out to solve. I can't keep paying you, and you owe me some money back for all of this work that doesn't meet code.
And so I was like, okay, well, go get your permits. And, here's 2,000 extra bucks to go get those permits that I wasn't expecting to pay. And he just couldn't do it. He applied for them. And then he started to submit plans and stuff. He literally drew the plans in pencil. When it came time where the city's like, hey, you got to take some action on this permit, I was like, okay, let's call a meeting between the city and the plan specialist and him. All 3 of us on one Teams call. From that meeting, it was very clear that I had to fire him. Well, I made a demand letter for all my money back. He was apologetic and all that, but I was like, look, man, you really screwed up here. You caused a massive hassle for me. I'm going to have to tear out literally every last bit of work that you did down there. Yeah, that's when I started doing my research and found them all.
Essentially, when we get involved in a situation like this, it's really tough for the client. But we have to start by just figuring out what's been done, what work is not up to code, what do we have to tear out, what can we keep. We'll salvage as much as we can, but often some of the basic components that get done first are done incorrectly, and so we have to tear a lot out. And then we put it back right and do it right the way it should have been done the first time. Then we have to go back to the beginning, get the right design drawings done. Most of the time when a contractor does this, he has none or very poor construction documents and drawings that don't communicate the scope well and don't communicate what needs done up to code. It's a long, circuitous route, but it's the right thing to do because it protects the homeowner's investment by pulling permits appropriately, protects their safety by doing things the right way, and it ultimately accomplishes their dream of having that space that they need. And for this client, accomplished his dream for having the space he needed in his basement for his growing family.
We're about 95% way through framing. We framed in a stairwell coming down or going up to a landing that then turns into their living room. Built this wall out further, cut a hole in their dining room floor to get the head height we need. He had covered up all of these walls, had a lot of it drywalled, and we had to tear the framing out, insulate behind it, and then build framing. The final thing was there's an egress window since this is going to be a bedroom down here. Egress window is a window large enough that opens large enough to be able to get out in case of a fire or flooding. And so there's very specific height requirements and dimensions, as well as the window well outside. So the height requirement is, I believe, 44 inches. It can't be any higher off the floor than that. This one is about 60.
One of the lines I used in my emails back and forth with Tim is, permits are not an option. This is the law that, the city would, like, my mortgage company could take away my mortgage and demand paid in full. Like the city could issue me daily fines. Like, this is serious business, and he didn't want to take that seriously at all. My failing was that I didn't ask for references, I think. I reviewed his bid, I checked his license, I checked reviews online and everything, but that may not be enough, especially if I've worked my whole life to afford this house, like, this is everything to me. That's why I take it seriously. It's not just a business transaction. It's very personal. To be quite honest, this is how my wife and I are going to start a family. This is how we get to that next step,
So how do you avoid this scenario on your next renovation? Well, the number one thing that I recommend people do is inspect what you expect. So when I hire a contractor, I expect them to provide certain things before they actually show up on site with a hammer to get started. And the things you should be looking for are, what do the drawings look like? Especially true of any design build firm because they're responsible for and creating them. But do the drawings communicate scope really clearly to me as an owner, as well as the construction teams in the city? If you don't know what to look for in construction drawings, check out the article that I've linked to in the description. Then what you want to inspect the contract. Is the contract a fixed price contract, or is it a cost plus contract, or is it a somewhere in the middle? You want a fixed price contract, or you don't know what your project's going to cost. With a cost plus contract, that's where the contractor gives you a rough guess of what it's going to cost. And then as you go through the project, you owe and are on the hook for whatever it costs, plus a certain amount that goes to him. Then the next thing you want to inspect, I expect them to have a good reputation. So I want to inspect that. Look on the CCB website, the Construction Contractor Board's website. Every contractor that I look at, has a negative review, somebody that complained about something. But what you want to look at is patterns of unaddressed problems in the reviews. If there's patterns of unaddressed problems, that's a major red flag. And you want to see patterns of great experiences. You want to see a lot of people that had great experiences with this contractor. Then finally, you want to inspect the actual work. Now, often you can't go and actually inspect their work. Sometimes if they have a showroom, you can inspect how stuff was installed there and see if it looks good and up to your standards. Sometimes you can ask to see a previous client. Sometimes that's hard to coordinate. But the thing that every single contractor should have is amazing photos of things they're really proud of. And this should be any contractor. This should be a really big contractor that hires a photographer. This should be a really small-time contractor that has an iPhone. They should have tons of photos of stuff they're proud of that really relate to your project and what you're looking to do. If you're in the middle of a project right now and it looks like a nightmare, it doesn't have to end that way. Just like the story I told you about our client, where he went through a year and a half of nightmare in his basement remodel. We were able to come in a matter of weeks in design and weeks in construction, turn that around and give him the project and deliver the dream that he really deserved and he set out to get in the very beginning. For more educational content and info about remodeling, subscribe here to our channel and check out our website. I'll see you next time.